Hi, my name is Lucas Pascal. This is my midterm assignment for TED 2220. Along with this video, I will either have a script attached in the Canvas submission or sent to you through email, including all the references that I cited for this video. So yeah, let's get started. As I have befriended new peers and heard from high school friends who went to college, it seems that everyone has that course. The one where they just gloss over all the forms of oppression and end the course by telling you that everyone should be treated equally. Yeah, awesome, right? That must mean Americans across the country know how to stop oppressions. Yet all those isms just kind of die off once you become a functioning adult. Sure, you may have the annual diversity conference where people demonstrate that they are different but should be loved, but rarely does any environment, especially a working class one, go over the confines of how to exactly confront them. This includes the term ableism, something I have heard almost exclusively in college. So what exactly is ableism? According to our main reading, ableism is the belief that being non-disabled, able-bodied, or able-minded is inherently better than having a disability or impairment. To most people familiar with the other isms of our society, this should come as little surprise since most isms involve being superior to someone else. However, what arguably makes ableism different from most of its peers is what I mentioned a few seconds earlier. The working class doesn't mention it. To make this point, I decided to ask 6 coworkers a simple question. Do you know what ableism is? Every single response I got was the exact same. No, I don't know what ableism is. This is the point that will be stressed the most because it shows that generations of varying backgrounds have not been educated on this topic, thus making everything I'm about to say about it, whether it be socially or in education, incredibly important. Ableism can be shown in many ways and can alter in severity. Sometimes it's as blatant as outright bullying. School kids on a playground, for example, might pick on an intellectually disabled child for being unable to read at others' paces, despite the fact that they have dyslexia. In the world of us adults, it could mean something as simple as disregarding a coworker to a party because they're in a wheelchair and couldn't handle it. However, in most instances, ableism can be something that is far more subtle. These subtle hints of ableism can be coined as microaggressions. In an NPR interview with John Jay College psychology professor Kevin Nadal, microaggressions are defined as everyday, subtle, intentional, and oftentimes unintentional interactions or behaviors that communicate some sort of bias towards a historically marginalized group. While they are certainly not exclusive to ableism, you can make the argument that ableism sees these in action the most. Examples are practically endless, but some that first pop up to my mind is being astonished at a child with autism spectrum disorder's gifted ability to be uber talented at something other non-disabled people can be as well. Or how about being so impressed with a blind person's ability to be normal that they don't even act blind? Wendy Liu, a journalist for Bustle, notes some other microaggressions that may be happening, including apologizing for someone's disability or insisting on being a friendly hand for a disabled person who can do it just fine. These microaggressions are important, not only because they are ableist by nature, but also because it perceives the intellectually disabled from a viewpoint that they are inherently diseased with something. This lets me dive into my next point, in that ableism and disabilities are often categorized into 2 different models of thought, the first of which is the medical viewpoint. It's a bit more nuanced than how I'm about to mention it, but the most basic way I can describe it is that it views the disabled as their written disorder, something that you live with rather than something society has to adapt to. For some health experts, this may come off as ideal for most intellectually disabled people. Some of them, along with the general public, may conclude that they are the only viewed in terms of who they are and what they have and their natural hindrances. To the average person, it might be simple to conclude that disabilities, while treatable, cannot be cured. In turn, this may lead to unintentionally harmful exclusion, including private schools for special needs students separating them from the non-disabled, giving different educational goals to those students, and only assuring that adults with disabilities have a job that's low task for their disability. As some of you can probably figure out by now, there are blatant problems that arise from this way of thinking. An article from the Social Creatures notes that a medical model of disability places problems on the disabled. They, for example, note that a person in a wheelchair who cannot access the building because of no ramp may be portrayed not as the building's problem, but instead as the individual's problem just because they're disabled. Instead, us educators tend to focus on the social model of disability. This means that rather than accepting the institutional pillars that deem disabled people incompetent, it instead urges us to satisfy the needs of those disabled citizens. Going back to the example provided by Social Creatures, instead of placing blame on someone with a wheelchair, we would instead focus on making more buildings wheelchair accessible for people. This allows us to view disabled people not as the problem, but rather view non disabled people as well as disabled people as part of the solution. As an educator in a working class environment, this is a crucial step to helping people with disabilities in our school. Our scope of disabilities is only getting more diverse, and more importantly, it may take several steps to assure that we achieve a social model of disability in the classroom. It can be as simple as giving legally blind children books with braille or books with larger words to read. It can also be as big as allowing a student with cerebral palsy to engage in mainstream classrooms full time. As long as we are taking steps to assure that ableism is diminished or eliminated, anything that makes a school or institution reduce barriers to success is a step closer to completing a social model of disability. When discussing ableism and its viewpoints, it would be negligent of me if we failed to mention those other isms and phobias that are unfortunately prevalent throughout our society. Ideas such as racism and xenophobia, homophobia and transphobia, sexism, and more can easily intersect with each other. How do we often view marginalized groups with disabilities? Are there new challenges that arise when people with multiple oppressions are faced into society? As a future working class educator, one of the first things that comes to mind when thinking of the students are how much their home life impacts their education and where they may end up as a result of their education. A 2022 report from the Autistic People of Color Fund suggests that people of color who may have autism or do have autism are more likely to be homeless due to the traits autism carries, in combination with people of color as a whole representing a decent chunk of the homeless population. They even cite a report that 12% of Great Britain's homeless population is autistic, despite making up just 1% of the total population of that country. This report is important because it reveals to educators that intersectionality, a fancy word for covering discriminations, it can exist within a social construct that is already oppressive regardless of any other social factors. This indicates that people of color and the disabled overlap to create a system that unfairly kicks them down. On a more personal note, Devani Tiwari, an Indian-born woman with epilepsy, describes the horrid accounts of being disabled and a woman in the workplace. After making her first mark into a law firm, she was told that if she revealed her disability to the workplace, that she would be unable to get the job. After hiding this from her workplace, she also experienced workplace harassment from male counterparts. The common theme? Both of these parts were her part of her identity that was something she couldn't control. This is important, again, to us educators because we need to realize that it is often the case that we need to raise more than one voice within the community or just with one person that we serve. If only one factor gets acknowledged, none of them do. Oppression is still happening either way. You may be asking yourself, how can we begin to fix these issues that are so poignant throughout our society? From the views you gathered, it may seem like a lot is on your plate and that this will require a much broader societal change. And that is definitely true to an extent. One way we can begin to change this is the place that I've mentioned all along, in the classroom. How so, you may ask? Well, we educators have an incredible tool to assure maximum student engagement called Universal Design Learning, or UDL. According to an article from Cornell University, UDL is a teaching approach that works to accommodate the needs and abilities of all learners. This means more than just changing your lesson plan to one big group learning every now and then, or occasionally making assignments different. This means the educator should achieve the goal of giving all students resources and opportunities that best fit them so that they can understand the topic at hand. What might these issues look like? Well, some students may work better as individuals rather than in groups. Some students may find it more satisfying and easier to work in a group. Rather than just confining to students to work what you've deemed is required and what is essential, a teacher with UDL in mind would allow students to work in whichever way they please, big groups, small groups, individuals, whatever. If one student wants to make their history project about Alexander the Great in the form of a song, a teacher with UDL would allow that. If a disabled student or student of color wishes to create a project that centers around their background and is relevant to the topic, UDL would highly approve of this. Giving students additional resources, allowing them to work on their pace, or anything that allows the students to display learning in the manner they see fit, will qualify under the umbrella of UDL. We have multiple personal accounts from educational experts that suggest UDL can be life-changing for students with disabilities, as well as other factors such as race. Riley Mulcahy, a founder of the project aimed to help reading disabled children, had a teacher introduce a visual organizer for him to gather his thoughts about where to start with writing, something that was awfully challenging for him since he had dyslexia. This worked so well that he continued to use this tool into college, and he ended up graduating with an English degree. Other teachers I have talked to about UDL have said that it has made a big impact on how they teach with their students. My own mentor teacher, since I'm doing pre-student teaching, has used it multiple times in her classroom, and I can definitely say that it has impacted students for the better in order to help them out. It can be something as simple, my apologies, as handing out a copy of a reading over digital copies, or as big as giving them leniency on how to do their project in their own way. Overall, UDL has the ability to make students more involved in the learning process and give them the opportunity to flourish if given the chance. For students of marginalized groups, and especially students with disabilities, it may allow them to connect with students on a social level they previously couldn't have if we stuck with one rigid learning strategy. Academically, it can cause students to boost grades because their intentions to learn have only gotten stronger and have been more inspired to do so. Ultimately, UDL is a tool that can help students of all backgrounds prosper, but most importantly, help disabled children become more involved students to show that they can become involved citizens in whatever path they decide is good for them. Thank you for listening.